Hi guys, good afternoon everyone. My name is Mason, so I'm the Director of Global Markets or International Growth for Tripadvisor. So me and my team are based in Singapore, where we look after is like really anything out of the US. So my team kind of looks after the strategy for how we tackle international markets, growing our core user base to Europe, Latin America, Asia Pacific, handling localization, translation, marketing, like adaptation to these markets. I'd love to share a little bit more on how we think about international growth. If there's questions, feel free to ask me after the session, and let's go. Click and click. Okay, so a bit of introduction. For those who don't know Tripadvisor, we're actually a travel platform. So a lot of travelers come to our site to find user-generated content reviews to understand like what's the best thing to do in Boston, in New York, in Japan, right? We're in more than 40 different markets. We have roughly 2 billion page views a year. Of course, with so many markets itself, there's challenges are also going to be like, how do you even focus? Which markets do you want to win? Which markets can you actually win? And what are competitive markets, right? If I look at 40 different markets every single day, it's not possible. So there is kind of a nuance to how we tackle each market of different priorities and different ways of nuances that we tackle that I'll share a little bit more with you. We have roughly 8 million listings globally now. So we work with hoteliers, restaurants, experiences, airlines all over the world, and connecting them to the 2 billion page view travelers that you see in the previous page. So international growth has always been exciting for a lot of people and a company because we know that there is a lot of growth coming from our region and also some of the emerging markets. The question is no longer about whether there's opportunity within international markets, but it's more of how do you prioritize it. And when we talk about prioritization, what does resourcing even mean? What does investment even mean? What does returns even mean to us, right? So this is a current challenge that we face for international growth today. The first one is translation is not really localization. So it's easier to just say I have a site in English, translate it to Japanese, hope for the best, and it works. Not true, right? If you look at travel behaviors in many different parts of the world, and even search behavior, people use different terms, different terminology, and understand different things. For example, we go to Taiwan, people don't search for cheapest hotel. They say, I want the most CP or cost profit, valuable things that, or if you go to Spanish, they don't search for things to do, they search for things to see. There's different nuances in language that needs to be localized beyond just translation that you adapt for. The second thing is fragmented marketing channels, right? In Singapore, probably Google is big, but if you go to Korea, Naver is a different story there, right? Or if you go to Japan, Twitter becomes bigger. You go to India, Facebook becomes bigger. Viber becomes bigger in different parts of the world. There are different marketing channels to reach out to users. So when you think about having multiple countries, or even a problem like us where we have 40 plus different countries, how do you think about optimizing your marketing channels and where you spend your time on? And if you want to tackle the first problem where each of these marketing channels need a different nuance in translation or localization beyond translation, how do you actually tackle such a problem? The last one is relevance gap. There is a lot of even in travel itself, there's a lot of different nuances in how people travel and think about what their best trip is like, and how does your platform cater to many of these different markets, right? One way, of course, is to say that I have a totally separate website for every single market, 40 different Tripadvisor websites. Then it becomes a nightmare to actually manage, maintain, and even keep it relevant. But if you want to have one similar site for every single kind of user around the world, how do you think about relevance in terms of making sure they can find the things they want and in the context that they want, right? For example, if you look at Europe, family travel is really big, right? How do you cater for family travel? And it's a different concept than if you think about Japan, where in Japan itself, domestic travel is big, solo travel is big, spas are huge. And with this very different constructs, how do you make sure that your site even looks the same, can cater for these different travelers, be it their travel pattern, travel discovery, and even payments and in-travel needs that they have, right? So that's kind of the challenges in global growth today. And how we tackle them, in a nutshell, is kind of these 3 things. The first one, we talk about language. I want to talk a little bit about how we think about localization beyond just translating it. So what we do for language, a lot of it is really structuring your team to understand that different content and different language have different priorities. So what I mean by that is that we kind of pick and choose, which are the markets that we feel are a lot more nuanced to language quality and then we over-invest in language quality for these markets where we feel that, for example, in France, if people see something that's like a little bit mistranslated, they actually lose trust, right? So you have to make sure that you really nail the quality there. And also different content have different importance, right? So if you look at your website itself, probably there are some things at the bottom where you feel it's a little bit okay-ish to have less high quality translation. We also have a nuanced kind of content strategy on like what requires machine translation only, what requires machine translation with human intervention, what's like purely like human driven translation, because we realize it's high impact, we can't get it wrong, we need to make sure that it's solved for it. So in terms of language, there is a kind of framework that we also try to apply to make sure that you prioritize your investments in the right places for quality translations. And then if you want to layer localization, of course you get like human intervention in it. In terms of product itself, we also try to cater a lot of like infrastructure around firstly identifying what gaps there are and allowing our company to react against it. So what does that mean? So we do a lot of like typical UXR research, and we form panelists within each of these markets, right? Because I feel that it's really important for us to understand the customers in the region. So we form panelists to understand, like, for Japanese travelers, these are our destination experts. French travelers, these are destination experts. They feed us a lot of information like, I am a French traveler, I use your site, and these are not relevant to me. Or I can't transact using this payment that everybody cares about. Or if you go to Germany, right? Like bank transfers are huge. I can't use bank transfer, and it's just cumbersome for me to use it. So we create an infrastructure where our community becomes our spokespeople and becomes like the feedback into our product life cycles and marketing life cycles, such that we can cater to a lot of this localization needs, and that allows us to adapt our supply and also our platform to local habits a lot more like fluidly and ultimately. The third one is like around cultural engagement. So I think for companies that have multiple country coverages, you can't expect to have the same kind of brand relevance and influence on each country. So the way you tackle different markets are going to be different. So for example, in markets where you have very high brand affinity, people know about you, maybe it's less so of like building more brand awareness, but more brand depth and consideration. So in these markets, we do a lot more campaign driven using our brand itself and giving value back to travelers using campaigns that are oriented around like our services, our features. But markets, for example, where we are just entering, like nobody knows Tripadvisor in some of these markets, okay, maybe not so much, but we are a smaller brand in these markets, then the approach is different. We work with community and we work with like influencers, we work with kind of like stakeholders who have higher brand affinity than us to try to push our brand or understand our brand better. So in terms of cultural engagement, we co-create a lot of content and we co-create a lot of campaigns with people or influencers or partners that have deeper brand affinity when we don't have it. And if not, if in the markets that we are a lot stronger in, then the approach is slightly different. So I think these three approaches are largely how we think about how we tackle internationalization at scale, where there are different focuses to make sure that firstly your translations are on point at the places where it matter. Secondly, where your product and service itself can have a feedback loop and can kind of address some of the local needs. The last thing is around like how do you understand cultural engagement and work with people on the ground to build your brand, be it in different markets and in different contexts. So I think it was also interesting to share a little bit of like how we're thinking about, forward-looking and investing in places where we feel that it's going to be more relevant and increasingly important within international markets. So we talk about translation, we talk about product, we talk about brand and engagement. These are three themes that we are trying to over-invest in because we feel that it'll be a lot more relevant in the next 3 to 5 years. So the first one is data-driven personalization, right? So I think a lot of companies do the same, where we are thinking about how do you cater your kind of recommendations across marketing, across like product, across different ways of communicating with the customers through different means. Like we do invest a lot in trying to firstly get community insights into our system and then using that to co-create content that's relevant and also interaction and discovery patterns that's relevant. So for example, right, some personalization examples is that French users French travelers that want to buy tours, most French travelers prefer French as a language, right? They don't go for English tours or they don't go for Chinese tours, which is pretty kind of intuitive. So what we do is that we make sure that the whole user experience that we have allows them to find the tours that are in French a lot easier. We recommend things that are French easier. Also, there are different nuances to kind of like how people discover things. Like, for example, in Japan itself, like they are very content heavy. They want to view a site that's like a lot of content. In Korea, people like reviews that are from international audience, less so of Korean audience. In Italy, it's different. People want like Italian reviews because they want to know people who travel like them. So using all these different insights, how do you personalize your site such that the interaction that you see is going to be different when people kind of view your page itself? Like Japan, can you open up more content immediately? In France, like when people view like details about a certain attraction or hotel, can you show them like what other French travelers are talking about? So just understanding how the nuance of personalization can be layered into some of like the product flows have been very successful for us, and it allows us to have like one similar site but different interactions for people that you care about within international markets. The second thing is like mobile first, right? So Tripadvisor has been always, centered or has traditionally been very strong in the States, but in the States it's still relatively a desktop-driven market. But I think the rest of the world, especially in Asia Pacific, it's a lot more mobile-driven, and that unlocks different behaviors and opportunity, different ways that we are exploring. So location-based insights are a bigger thing now. In mobile itself, like mobile purchases tying with payments, also like very dynamic with more payments. We are also trying to come up with lightweight things or lightweight ways to give content and give kind of value back to community. So because in desktop we have much larger screen and real estate, right? People have time to type in a lot more things, open different tabs to explore and compare stuff. Within mobile, I think the expectation of in-browser interactions to fulfill a lot of the discovery needs is very different. So we are investing a lot in understanding how mobile recommendations can be different, mobile interactions can be different, and how people can engage with the content differently for mobile, which is, as I mentioned, more light-hearted ways of like entering like data itself. The last thing that I'll mention is that we are also kind of rethinking how to engage the community in different ways and engaging like, understanding how user-generated content can be contributed in different ways. So a big part of like international growth, I feel, is also trying to break the cold start problem for many of the markets that I have. So in markets where, you have billions of users using it, right? It's a very different use case of saying you have a market that you just entered for a year and you don't have enough traction on the ground, people who believe in you. So understanding how the community and the community's perspective for brand is a lot more important for us in these markets. So it's less sort of like what our brand talks about ourselves, like how the Tripadvisor talk about ourselves in like Dubai, for example, right? It's more sort of like how do you build a community that trusts you, can talk to kind of their friends and families about your brand and be ambassadors of the brand. So more and more, I think as we go forward within like international explorations, we are thinking more about how community can be part of your marketing story beyond you just pushing out through your CRM or paid channels, which I think can be a very effective lever for us. So I think that's kind of like, some high-level sharings of like where we focus most of our time for international growth and where some of the explorations we're heading towards are. If you guys are interested in know more about how we think about things or how Tripadvisor treats different markets differently, or if there are some markets that you want to go deeper into, feel free to reach out. Happy to talk to anyone here. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mason.